Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics podcast. I'm your host, Alex Sofronas, and today we're on with Nicoline Strøm-Jensen. Nicoline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. Happy to be here. So my name's Nicoline Strøm-Jensen. I work at Adjust. I am in program management, and I've been in the ad tech industry for close to 11 years now. Kind of time flies. And I love helping build products, and have gotten to know the industry really well, even through all of its craziness over the past few years. So excited to talk to you about some stuff today.
Yeah, awesome. So maybe start by providing a little overview of what does Adjust do for businesses?
Sure. So Adjust is a mobile measurement partner, and we do mainly mobile attribution. That's the bread and butter. But over the years, we've had to add a lot as the industry has added a lot of needs. And so we do a lot of measurement analytics and delving more and more into how clients can review their data and optimize their campaigns, see what their return on ad spend is, look at which creatives are performing the best, connecting with their partners. We've also done some work on incrementality and of course, made SCAN easier for everyone. That's the SCAD attribution network for Apple's privacy. Yeah, that's, I think, it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into those. Maybe starting with the last one, tell us about scan attribution, little overview for those who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, sure. So SCAN, the shortened version, SCAN, was part of, I think that Apple had it for many years, but then they really pushed it in 2019, 2020. And it's basically their push into a more privacy-centric industry. And so privacy for users to not be tracked and identified while they're in their mobile ecosystem. And so basically what this means is they created their own methodology around attribution. And so not using the IDFA, which is the device identifier for iOS devices, and so Apple devices. And that caused a big shift in the industry because of this change. Not only did brands, advertisers need to make changes and adopt this method, but also partners and, of course, mobile measurement partners and other kinds of analytics tools had to also adjust and create a ecosystem where all of them could work together still. So mobile measurement partners like Adjust had to build out how to set up your conversion values, which is basically how you send and track events and installs with the SCAD network, and updating SDK, making it easier for clients to continue to track that information and campaigns on iOS. So we built out on our platform ways to do that. So basically doing the heavy lifting for clients, and then connecting with partners and updating all of those integrations so that advertisers can still see their data.
Okay, so to what degree was personalization impacted with that change?
Yeah, I would say pretty significantly. There's still so SCAD network is going to track any activity, and it doesn't matter or they don't leverage the IDFA. Apple does the attribution. They're allowed to see what they already see because it's their devices, it's the iOS devices. And so they perform the attribution and then send along that data. On the other side of things, ad tracking transparency side, which is ATT, follows more of the traditional attribution data set that advertisers and partners and everyone in the industry is used to, which has IDFA. And users on iOS devices, when they open apps, they've probably seen the little message that asks if they allow for tracking. So if you say that you do allow for tracking, then these businesses are still allowed to collect your IDFA. And so when that is allowed, we're able to do deterministic attribution. So we can tell, all right, this device, you clicked on this ad and then you installed this app, and we're able to marry those together using that device ID. So the difference with scan is that attribution is still happening, but it's happening by Apple. And then they send all of that data back to the partners, the advertisers, and then the partners send it through to the MMPs. Clients can also send postbacks directly to MMPs, so there is some of that going on. And actually, originally, when Apple came out with SCAD Network and were making it a prominent attribution method in the industry, Apple search ads was not part of the SCAD network. But very recently, they have now incorporated Apple search ads as part of SCAD network. And so that's where the direct postbacks to your MMPs come into play, because that's how they've set it up. But yeah, so there's kind of two sides to the coin, which gives two different sets of data, which is also the other challenge of kind of understanding and reading those data sets.
Gotcha. Okay. So this seems similar to how Facebook built this walled garden around their data and limited what sort of identifiable information is sent back to advertisers who use Facebook. This is similar almost at the device level, where Apple is forming a walled garden around all of the data and attribution that happens on their devices, and then they're instituting more controls over what data is shared. Is that kind of the trend?
Yeah, so that is the trend. And if you as a user are interested, every app has privacy and security documentation that you can review and see what do they collect, what is it used for, and why, so that you can be more informed. Obviously, all of those legalese is not something that most of us dive into, but that's where it stems from, is the users having more control over their data and understanding where their data is being shared and what it's being used for. And a lot of times, and of course, I'm in the industry, so I have my own opinions. And of course, there's nefarious actors out there, but generally speaking, certainly MMPs and a lot of advertisers are really just using it to make the ad experience better for users. And I personally like to have some tracking because I am lazy when I'm doing research on something. So when I moved into my house, I was looking for various furniture and I just had to search once or twice. And then I started getting ads for all these different companies doing different kinds of furniture that I wanted. So I thought that was an advantage. I didn't have to go do too much searching on my own. It was just being fed that by the targeting that was possible with using some of the device level data that I have and that I shared and allowed to track. So there are pluses and minuses to both sides, and to be tracked, to be able to see catered advertising, I find it more pleasant than seeing ads for things I just have no interest in. I find somehow psychologically or emotionally, I feel like those are more annoying because I'm like, I don't need a car. I don't need all these other products. But when I'm looking for furniture in my example, then that's helpful. And then now lots of cat toys and whatever else. So yeah, that's where the shift has been. So if you're a user out there and you've started to see that your ads aren't of interest, that's probably why, because there's privacy mechanisms in place and advertisers are not able to cater to your interests.
Do you know if there's a financial incentive for Apple to build this walled garden, in the sense of, are they selling the data? Is there any cost associated with receiving the data from Apple devices more so now than before? Or is there really no profit incentive? It's more privacy focused.
That's a nice question. You're going to get me in trouble with Apple. So speculation on my side, and just seeing kind of the results of when SCAD Network came out, financially, there's definitely an impact, primarily against all other networks, because Apple itself has Apple search ads. So they are also a network profiting from advertising. And of course, there was a lot of grumbling in the industry when Apple search ads was not even part of the SCAN network. So it was like they weren't following their own rules. I don't think that Apple is selling data. I feel like that's out of their scope and interest. And I feel like that they wouldn't necessarily do that, but they have a lot of data and they can use it to their advantage. And like you said, being a little bit of a walled garden, or very much a walled garden, they have a lot of control where they can make decisions and push the industry to make these shifts and tell the narrative that they want, which is obviously they were very public in campaigns about privacy, especially when Scan Network came out, trying to push their users to understand, oh, this is for your privacy, which it is, but they, in my opinion, they went a little overboard. But the impact certainly was that other networks weren't able to as effectively advertise. And so I think there was money lost by their competitors, which is why there's some lawsuits in different countries and things like that. But then also that just made it hard for advertisers, which was the most interesting aspect. I think that this shift was and continues to be a challenge for advertisers to really understand the effectiveness of their ad dollars. Because if they don't have as much visibility into how their campaigns are performing, because they can't necessarily see if they're hitting the right audience and aren't able to retarget as effectively as they could in the past, that obviously had an effect on them. There were some clients of ours who shifted a lot of their budget to Android while they were trying to figure out things like that. So then ultimately that would hurt Apple directly down the funnel. But yeah, and I think over the past few years, it's leveled out a bit. People have started to understand, okay, how can I work with Scan, even though they're not super confident, and it is a challenge to have all these multiple data sets to try to make decisions off of. But I think with the tooling that a lot of different companies, MMPs being of that group, that we've built out has helped significantly in understanding performance side of things. Apple has also made a few improvements to make things a little bit more visible for advertisers. Some of those changes haven't fully been pushed out. There's been this, I don't know if this lull in time. I think there was a lot of adoption for Scan 3, and then Scan 4 came out, and there was just this hesitation. And a lot of that had to do with the big players like Google or Meta not preparing their network to run Scan 4 ads. They're now coming on board, but it's already been, like 2 years. So that's been an interesting shift, is that people really, it was very intense in the first couple of years. Back then I was a technical account manager. So I was working very directly with all of our clients and trying to educate them on what it is, how it works. And it is rather complex. We used to joke that some engineers just were writing some stuff on a bar napkin, having fun. Yeah, but I think we've definitely over time made it a lot simpler, done a lot of things on the back end, the MMPs have. And so clients, advertisers, marketers, they don't have to worry as much about all of the little nuances, and are just becoming more familiar with the data as well. So it's leveled out a little bit, I would say, at this point.
Okay. So that naturally brings up the question about, which doesn't really require as much attribution, right? It's more looking at the spend attribution, but then just total sales or whatever the dependent variable would be. Would you say that MMM is more important now than even before, now that we have all of these additional privacy restrictions in advertising?
Yeah. First of all, I'm glad I'm not the only one who sometimes says M&M.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I love M&M. Gosh, see? Very confusing. So I would say yes. The answer to that is yes. I think our industry also loves buzzwords, and something gets really exciting and then everyone talks about it. And then I start to working closely with product and engineering and clients, processing feedback and talking with them about their needs. And has certainly been an interesting one. I think incrementality was a little bit more familiar because it's a component of it, but something that's been leveraged more prominently for a long time with A/B testing and other methodologies there. But I think that as you said, with both incrementality and tools, you're focused mainly on the spend data. So you're using that spend data. You're not as focused, or you don't need the granularity of the attribution information. You're looking at the spend, and then you're looking at trends across totals. So it has made it easier and another way to look at your data set to help to optimize and see the effectiveness of different campaigns. So starting a new campaign or ending a campaign, what does that incrementality look like? What was the effect? And then on the side, going a little bit longer term, what do my budgets look like? Where am I hitting saturation? And where can I put more budget or should put more budget, given the patterns that we've seen in the past and what the focus is for different campaigns, and even looking at seasonality and some of the other, and depending on what your app is, the effects of, if you're a weather app, obviously different areas are going to have the use and maybe the spend around weather events, right? So being able to see that is certainly an advantage. And I would say, in the beginning of when SCAD Network came out, I talked to so many clients about how you want to let go of the past. When we hit a certain point, I was telling clients, look, we're not going backwards. Like, all that granular data isn't coming back the way it was. As an industry, we need to focus on what are other mechanisms, what are other methodologies, what are other tools that we can use to not necessarily do exactly what we were doing with the granular data, but still be able to make those decisions that we need to make for optimization, for good return on ad spend, and all of that. And so I was happy to see people starting to adopt and trying to learn and understand these other tools. And I think also the boon of AI has also helped push that along. And it was incrementality, then now AI. Those are the buzzwords that have gone. If you follow all the conferences and things in our industry, those come up. That was the pattern. I'm imagining at MAU this year, it'll be a lot more AI related sessions versus, if you look in the past, it was more CTV or what's hot right now. But yeah.
Speaking of AI, how is AI impacting marketing optimization?
Yeah, AI has been really interesting. I think it was not being an engineer and being thrown into a few different projects. I was talking to director of engineering at Adjust the other day, and I said, sometimes when you guys send me a message, I don't really understand what you're saying. I'm still trying to learn. I'm watching YouTube videos and trying to understand how AI works, what these LLM models are, and how it all fits together. And he said, don't worry, we don't even really know yet. We're all learning. It just seems, because some of the tools are a huge advantage, of course, is for coders. There's so many applications. And I think for other roles, obviously, there's a lot of other kinds of applications, but I think it's just not as obvious, right? But AI has definitely, just like I said, on the back end, it's been helping engineers work faster, do reviews of their code, set standard little bits of code. So they've been working faster and testing all sorts of different tools. I think in general, for learning and for formatting things, I've been using it a lot in just so simpler ways. But with building out how to help with marketers, there's a lot of work being done on creative optimization and speeding up even the creative creation. So a lot of creative studios are using it to generate more ideas and give it prompts that give these different kinds of user segments that they're trying to target and make tweaks there. Then we also have tooling to try to help answer questions. So working with an MMP our tools are very complex. They're very comprehensive. There's a lot of different components, and it can sometimes be very overwhelming for certain users. And back when I was a technical account manager, and even throughout my career at Adjust, which has almost been 7 years, talking to clients, I have to remind myself that, okay, our tool has many components and different folks at our advertisers use it in slightly different ways, but it's also only a small percentage of necessarily their day to day. And so they're not going to be as educated about it as, of course, not as anyone who works at the company, but it's just in general. And how to make it easier for them to fit that piece that they use into their day to day. And I think working on tooling that using AI to add, we're working on a chat kind of bot that will be in our UI to help analyze the data when they're creating a report and just to be able to chat with it. And hopefully it'll expand to being able to ask other questions, like if they're having an issue building out a campaign with a tracking link, or how to set up a certain partner, or this kind of thing, to make that all easier and faster. So you don't have to be an expert. You just have to know what you need, and then it will be able to guide you. So I think those are just some of the advancements that we've experienced thus far. I'm sure there are many more to come. And then obviously we're using to build out our incrementality tool and our M tool, and even our predictions tool has all used machine learning and modeling techniques.
Yeah, I think, like you said, AI can help in a lot of different areas. I think even especially in analytics, helping with some of the more advanced technical concepts, like even building an MMM model is something that AI can help to actually architect internally rather than having to go to different vendors. And these can be very costly. So I think AI kind of makes it easier or cheaper to do some of the more complex kinds of analytics that over the last decade it would cost tens of thousands to hire, or even hundreds of thousands to hire people at agencies to do if you're in a smaller company, for example.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also just reducing, I know clients have tons of different spreadsheets and that they're trying to blend together, and especially with all the different data sets, I think that can make all of that simpler, easier, more efficient, and more cost effective than in the past. Like you said, to have people doing all of those things manually and or employing an agency, depending on the size of your company.
Yeah. So you mentioned ROAS earlier. What's your approach to, and maybe that's a little bit too broad, but how have you seen return on ad spend calculations change over time? How is it calculated now versus how was it calculated before?
That's a good question. I think in the past, going further back, you had different tools tracking ad spend, ad revenue, attribution. It was all these separate parts. And the industry, or a lot of the tooling, like an MMP, has combined all of that now into one place. So it makes it easier for clients and marketers to evaluate their return on ad spend. So that's one area, because now you can track ad spend, ad revenue, all of your events, everything in one place. And that's made that a lot easier. I think the calculation obviously hasn't changed. I think that what is interesting is the more flexibility of looking at different metrics and different activities for a particular user than having one KPI. I think I've seen marketers still have a key KPI, since that is what the K stands for, but to have one that they focus on primarily, but then to expand and have additional metrics that also they evaluate for a different level of return on ad spend. So they have their main target, which is what they bring to their partners and networks and say, okay, this is what we should hit. That's what we're optimizing towards. Because you can't necessarily give a network, here's 5 things to optimize towards. But as a marketer, you have these secondary, third, fourth, and other metrics that you can look at that all can tie back to how you're perceiving your return on ad spend. So I think I've seen more expansion there because of all of the data aggregation. It's become a lot easier. And in analytics tools, you have access to all of those metrics and you can evaluate the differences. And then even identify, maybe you give a different ROAS kind of metric to different partners who to optimize towards. So yeah, I think that's primarily where I've seen it.
You mentioned that the ROAS calculation hasn't changed. I'm curious if you think it ever will. And what I mean by that is maybe there's something in the realm of understanding, and maybe it won't if we take a broad enough approach that it's really just always going to be what we got for what we gave to the market in terms of spend and what we messaged. But do you think there will ever be an additional data point introduced into ROAS is as to the psychological impact of each source and its weight in the decision? And this is going pretty far out, but things like Neuralink are just being developed now, and it will always be a subset of the population. It'll always be looking at the people who are maybe more risk takers, right? Or injured populations that need it. It's never going to really be like a natural sample size of everybody. But if we could extrapolate from those subsets of people, do you think we could measure proportionate psychological impacts from different types of marketing and introduce that into ROAS? And we're thinking here like 30, 50 years into the future.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it's interesting that you bring that up too, because I was thinking about just product development in general and the emotional part of those interviews and understanding what clients need when you're building a product. And there is that emotional piece that you want to focus on, and how they're reacting are signals to, okay, is this the direction we should go, or is this the direction we should go? And you're talking on similarly, but with the actual kind of user behavior, user feeling towards that app, right? In this case. And I think there is a lot of information that you can get from user behavior and satisfaction. And it's interesting. I think we would want to incorporate more ways to try to track, this seems like a nefarious word in this case, but to get that information from users of how satisfied they are. And I think in the current way that we do that, sometimes there are the little pop-up surveys or things like that. And yes, those can work, but I think we all know that psychologically we tend to answer surveys or go in and give feedback when we're unhappy versus happy. And so that's much harder to quantify. And obviously the unhappy is good to know too, because you can make improvements. But when you're talking about the return on the investment, is who are the users, how many of the users, is it a specific segment of users who are really engaged with the app, use it, find it valuable in their day-to-day, whatever segment they fall into. And I think that it would be interesting, maybe even using AI. We already have tools like Hotjar or something that kind of monitors user behavior within an app. And can we glean more from those signals to extrapolate a hypothesis on the mood or feeling of users as they use that app? So yeah, that's just me thinking out loud, but I do feel that it is important for further development and improvements to also understand what is good, what's the segment of users who are finding it really valuable, that are likely not the segment of users who are sharing that information. You've got just the users who bring, oh, this isn't useful to me. If it did this, then it would be helpful. And yeah, and I think you can also see that in some metrics of if you're tracking events, this person is playing this game to the millionth level, or an app like Duolingo, there's this many people with a 2,000 day streak. And, but even that, how that doesn't necessarily indicate the pleasure or satisfaction a user has, because I brought up Duolingo and I love it. I have a over 1,000 day streak, but my mom and I both do it, and she's been using it longer than I have. And it's funny how when they make changes, she always gripes about, now I don't know where something is, and this changed and I don't like it as much. But she's still satisfied. She still uses it every day. But yeah, how do they get more of that information into their data set? So yeah, so anyway, sorry, I could probably talk about that all day, but
I
that's a
love
big
that.
concept.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking that, but you brought up a really great point, and I think even more important aspect to it than what I was even thinking, which is how do we optimize for the most satisfaction in the user and not just revenue? Because
Yeah.
we can look at revenue, but like you said, that might come with positive feelings or negative feelings, and that will affect word of mouth. So your mom, for instance, would maybe share it with her friends, but then tell them, oh, I don't like the recent updates and whatever, and that would probably lessen the friend's likelihood to sign up. And word of mouth being the most important marketing tactic, really, and the
Absolutely.
least trackable. We need to use maybe things like satisfaction to be a leading indicator of how
Mm.
word of mouth would be perceived. I guess now that I mention word of mouth, do you think we'll ever have a better tracking of or a better understanding of word of mouth? I know we have online tracking for that with like sentiment analysis, but that, kind of like your point before, is going to be biased towards probably the more negative emotions, and the ones that are satisfied, even really satisfied, might not go out of their way to share that. So how do you think that word of mouth will be better tracked in the future, or will it be?
Yeah, people already speculate that our phones are listening. So maybe sometime in the future, Google and Apple will tell us, "Yep, we've actually been listening, and this is what we're doing with all of that data." But yeah, barring that, it's hard. And even just going back to me thinking about product development and how to talk to clients and get the truth, not just validating ideas that you have as a product developer, as the owner of the product, app, whatever. That's the hardest challenge, is how do you extract that information? And so yeah, word of mouth, I think, will probably always be this nebulous factor that is there in the background, but you don't really have a clear idea of what its impact has been. I think it's something that companies should probably pay more attention to and try, yeah, to come up with ways to extract that information from users. Maybe having, just like we do when we're doing product development for a SaaS product, we try to have customer groups that come together, like an advisory board. Maybe they can reach out to different users that they've identified and try to put together a group and make it fun and understand, okay, what are you hearing? How do you talk about the app? And just going back to my Duolingo example, Duolingo is a client of Adjusts. And so I know some of the folks over there. And since my mom is such a super fan, I did connect her with their folks at Duolingo so that she could provide feedback and stuff. And then they sent her some swag as a thank you. But
Oh,
it's just things like that. How do you connect with your users more to even get the warm fuzzy stuff? Like, Of course, we don't want, and that's the challenge too, when you're getting feedback, you don't want people just to validate you or tell you great things. You want them to be honest, to really talk through, like my mom, she loves the app, but then gets frustrated with certain changes. And that's obviously also expected, right? You're always going to be trying to make improvements. It'll feel like an improvement for some segment of users. It'll be more of a challenge for other segment of users. But yeah, I think reaching out to users more would be, and it'd be something really cool, and not just looking at them as, okay, it's this device, they clicked on these things. Maybe, and it could only be done with apps that have, and most apps at this point do, but have a sign up where you have an account with them and email. But I think that would be really interesting. And Duolingo does their, what is it called? I'm blanking, but they have an event once a year, DuoCon, that are these sessions where they talk about interesting things and give some presentations, and users can join. I think it's now been virtual since the pandemic, but it used to be in person. And I think that's really cool to build a community around your app. And I think that helps with the word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking, in addition to that, maybe in the future we could use all of the data we have around social networks and who's connected to who, and if it's almost trying to model the negative space in our attribution. So if we don't see any clear reason why somebody found our product, or we just have no data on them, but we see that they are closely connected on, let's say, 5 different social media platforms to this other person that is a super user of the product, then we could maybe infer that it's a word of mouth. And I don't think that's a thing yet, but I could see that happening.
Yeah, I agree. I could see that happening too. If marketers, if brands could think outside the box that we've been in and look at that connection in a different way, then I think you're right. Trying to use the data that we already have and build out more understanding or hypotheses around what we're seeing. So yeah, I think that's an interesting idea.
Final question, because you mentioned it, do our phones listen to us?
I try not to think about it too much. Everyone has their examples of, I was talking to my friend about this thing. I've never Googled it. I've never asked any app on my phone. And then suddenly I saw ads for it. I think we all have those stories. And I know that even though I generally have Siri turned off because I don't use it. It's funny that I am in this industry, but I try to not use my phone. I try to be very present and not have, and I don't like noises and things coming up. But every once in a while, somehow she turns on. And I'm always confused by why she is talking to me when I go into settings, and I don't know what it is. But I think there's certainly a possibility that there's apps and things that are picking up some stuff. Like I said, there's enough examples of people, but at the same time, maybe it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory. And I might not put it past the Googles and Apples of the world. They're businesses and trying to build products that are helping people be more efficient or whatnot. But yeah, I don't know. It's, again, I think it's not something I like to think about too often.
Yeah, that's generally my conclusion as well. I think it just comes down to a few apps that are a little bit shady, and especially things that, are from smaller companies. Maybe like you just download this random app and it's from a different country, and they might not have the same rules. Maybe they're like more legally protected in this because they're somewhere offshore, and they just like collect the data and then sell it. They maybe wash it, almost like laundering money, but like laundering data. And then they like sell it as like intent data through another company, and then that flows into data sets that like legitimate businesses buy, and they don't even know that's where it came from. And like that's why there's so much question. That's why we really don't know a lot about it, because I think it's like if people knew what apps were doing that, they obviously wouldn't download it, and the whole thing would like disappear. And overall, like you said, it helps everybody when there's more intent data that's more accurate. It helps all the businesses, not everybody. And so they're almost all incentivized to not look into it and not ask what's going on, because if it is happening, it's only helping them. And if it's not happening, then they have nothing to look into. So there's like nothing for them to, there's no incentive for them to do anything.
Yeah. I wonder if this is how the whole TikTok controversy started. Is a couple people were like, but yeah, no, I think certainly it would be interesting. And if we're curious about a company like TikTok, like part of, that it's China owned, like what about all of the other, like you said, these smaller apps that kind of are super under the radar and are not being scrutinized like a Meta or a Google or a TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, X, that are more prominent and being looked at. I think that, in general, the industry, it's interesting where there's oversight and attention versus not. So I don't know, maybe time will tell. I think we're all going to be surrounded by more robots soon. So
yeah, it'll just be more obvious that they're listening
exactly.
now.
It's going to be more. It's going to start to be much more obvious. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nicoline.
More time in the garden.
Exactly.
The plants can listen to me. That's fine.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's the real solution, is ditch the technology if you don't want it listening or anything like that.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Nicolina. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate you sharing all of your insights about mobile analytics and attribution and all the rest. So thank you so much again. And thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is super fun. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. And we'll talk to you soon.